The water was supposed to be her escape, her moment of freedom from a life that felt suffocatingly small. Instead, it became the place where everything changed. Her name was Alyssa Morgan, and she was drowning, the cold, dark lake pulling her down into silence while the summer party continued oblivious on the distant shore. She had gone out too far, misjudged her strength, and now the water was claiming her with indifferent efficiency. But someone saw. Someone always watching from the shadows noticed the struggling figure, the desperate splashing that quickly became stillness. His name was Marcus Vale, and he ruled the city's underworld with ruthless precision. He wasn't supposed to be at that lake, wasn't supposed to dive into those dark waters and pull a dying stranger into his arms. But he did. And when Alyssa woke the next morning in silk sheets she didn't recognize, in a room that spoke of wealth beyond her understanding, she discovered that being saved by a man like Marcus Vale meant her ordinary life had just been replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more complicated. Alyssa Morgan was 23 and exhausted by the weight of being unremarkable. She worked as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job that paid just enough to cover a shared apartment and student loans, but offered nothing in the way of excitement or purpose. She was pretty in an understated way, with light brown hair she wore in a sensible cut, hazel eyes that seemed perpetually tired, and a slender frame that came more from stress than exercise. Her wardrobe consisted of interchangeable business casual outfits and a few weekend pieces that had seen better years. She had friends, casual acquaintances really, people she smiled at during lunch breaks, and occasionally joined for drinks she couldn't quite afford. Her family lived 3 states away, a mother who called twice a month with thinly veiled disappointment, and a younger brother excelling at everything Alyssa had tried and failed to achieve. She had convinced herself she was fine with this life, that ambition was overrated, and stability was its own reward. But late at night, in the silence of her cramped bedroom with its water-stained ceiling and traffic noise, she felt the crushing weight of a future that looked exactly like her present, stretching endlessly forward with no variation, no surprise, no meaning. The invitation to the lake party had come from a coworker, Diane, who occupied the desk next to Alyssa's and possessed the kind of easy confidence Alyssa envied. "It's going to be amazing," Diane had insisted, handing Alyssa a flyer for the annual summer gathering at Crescent Lake, a popular recreation area an hour outside the city. "Everyone goes. Swimming, barbecue, bonfire. You need to get out more, Rach. Live a little." Alyssa had hesitated, uncomfortable with large social gatherings and uncertain about spending money on gas and the expected contribution for food. But something in Diane's cheerful insistence, or perhaps the oppressive heat of another weekend alone in her apartment, had made her agree. The lake was beautiful that Saturday afternoon, a wide expanse of dark blue water surrounded by pine trees and rocky shores. The party was already in full swing when Alyssa arrived. Dozens of people scattered across the small beach, music blaring from portable speakers, the smell of grilling meat mixing with sunscreen and lake water. Alyssa felt immediately out of place in her modest one-piece swimsuit among women in designer bikinis, among men with gym-sculpted bodies and expensive sunglasses. Diane was already half drunk, surrounded by friends Alyssa didn't know, and after a few perfunctory introductions, Alyssa found herself drifting to the edges of the gathering, invisible once again. She waded into the water seeking relief from both the heat and her discomfort. The lake felt wonderful, cool and clean against her skin. She swam out slowly, enjoying the rhythm of her strokes, the quiet that came with distance from the noise. She was a decent swimmer, had taken lessons as a child, but she was out of practice and didn't notice how far she had drifted until she paused to catch her breath and realized the beach looked very small. She turned to swim back and felt the first cramp, a vicious seizing in her left calf that made her gasp. She tried to stretch it out, treading water, but the second cramp hit her right thigh almost immediately. Panic flooded her system. She tried to stay calm, tried to float, but her legs wouldn't cooperate and she was tired. So tired. She called for help, but her voice was weak, and the music was loud, and no one was looking in her direction. Water filled her mouth as she went under, and she kicked frantically, breaking the surface just long enough to draw a desperate breath before going down again. The third time she surfaced, she barely managed a weak splash before the exhaustion and the cramping pulled her under, for what she was certain would be the last time. The water closed over her head, and everything became muffled, distant. Alyssa's lungs burned, screaming for air she couldn't provide. She felt herself sinking, the light from the surface growing dimmer, and a strange calm settled over her terror. This was how it ended. Unremarkable Alyssa Morgan, drowning in a lake at a party where no one would notice her absence until it was far too late. Then something grabbed her, strong arms wrapping around her chest from behind, pulling her upward with powerful, decisive strokes. She broke the surface and gasped, choking on air and water, her vision blurred and darkening at the edges. She felt herself being dragged, felt the solid presence of another person cutting through the water with her dead weight in tow. And then everything went black. When consciousness returned, it came in painful fragments. The sensation of being lifted, of hard ground beneath her back, of pressure on her chest and air being forced into her lungs. She coughed violently, water pouring from her mouth, her body convulsing with the effort to expel the lake she had swallowed. Strong hands turned her on her side, supporting her through the spasms. She heard voices, male voices, urgent and commanding. "Get the car. Now. We're leaving before anyone calls authorities." "Is she breathing?" "Yes. Pulse is steady. She'll be fine." She tried to open her eyes but managed only slits, catching glimpses of darkening sky, of concerned faces she didn't recognize, of a man crouched beside her with dark hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to catalog her every breath. Then she was being lifted again, cradled against a broad chest, carried away from the noise and the party. She tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but her throat was raw and her body felt impossibly heavy. "Sleep," a deep voice said close to her ear, authoritative and strangely gentle. "You're safe. Just sleep." And because she had no strength left to resist, Alyssa obeyed. She woke to silence and softness. The first thing Alyssa noticed was the quality of the sheets, smooth and cool against her skin, far superior to anything she had ever slept on. The second thing she noticed was that she was wearing clothes that weren't hers, an oversized soft cotton shirt that smelled faintly of expensive cologne. The third thing she noticed was the room itself. It was enormous, easily 3 times the size of her entire bedroom, with high ceilings, tall windows draped in heavy curtains that filtered morning sunlight into a soft glow, and furniture that looked both antique and impeccably maintained. She sat up slowly, her body aching, her head pounding with a dull, persistent throb. Her throat felt scraped raw. Memories of the lake came rushing back, the drowning, the strong arms, the authoritative voice. Where was she? Alyssa swung her legs out of bed, noting that someone had bandaged a scrape on her knee she didn't remember getting. The floor was cool hardwood beneath her bare feet. She stood carefully, testing her balance, and walked to the nearest window. She pulled back the curtain and stared. The view showed a massive estate, manicured gardens stretching toward a tree line, a stone fountain in a circular drive where several expensive cars were parked. This wasn't a house. This was a mansion, the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. Fear spiked through her confusion. She spun toward the door just as it opened. A woman entered, middle-aged and professionally dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white blouse. She smiled pleasantly, as if finding a confused stranger in her employer's bedroom was perfectly normal. Good morning, Miss Morgan. I'm Catherine, the house manager. How are you feeling? Alyssa's voice came out as a rasp. Where am I? Whose house is this? You're at the Riverside Estate, Catherine replied calmly. This is Mr. Vale's home. He asked me to check on you when you woke. Alyssa's mind raced. Vale. The name meant nothing to her. Why am I here? What happened after the lake? Catherine's expression remained professionally neutral. Mr. Vale pulled you from the water yesterday evening. You had stopped breathing. He revived you and brought you here for medical attention. Our private physician examined you last night while you were sleeping. You have minor water aspiration and some muscle strain, but you're going to be fine. You were in his bed? The question came out sharper than Alyssa intended. A mixture of fear and something else she couldn't name. Catherine's lips twitched with what might have been amusement. Mr. Vale slept in one of the guest rooms. He simply wanted you to have the most comfortable space during your recovery. He's waiting downstairs when you feel ready to speak with him. I've brought some clothes that should fit you. There's a bathroom through that door. Take your time. Catherine gestured to a chair where a neat stack of clothing waited, designer labels Alyssa recognized from store windows she had never dared enter. Then the woman left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving Alyssa alone with her spiraling thoughts. She wanted to leave immediately, to run from this place and whatever complicated situation she had woken into. But she was wearing a stranger's shirt and nothing else, had no idea where her own clothes or belongings were, and had no car or phone or way to get back to the city. She was trapped by circumstance and her own vulnerability, dependent on the kindness of a man she didn't know, a man wealthy enough to have private physicians and estates and staff. After a long shower in a bathroom larger than her kitchen, Alyssa dressed in the provided clothes, dark jeans that fit perfectly, and a simple cream-colored blouse that felt like silk against her skin. Someone had left low-heeled shoes that were exactly her size. The attention to detail was unsettling. She found her way downstairs by following the sound of quiet conversation. The house was even more impressive from the inside, all dark wood and marble, artwork that looked original and expensive, architectural details that spoke of old money and careful preservation. Alyssa followed a long hallway to what appeared to be a study, the door partially open. She paused at the threshold, suddenly afraid to enter, to confront whatever came next. A voice spoke from within, the same voice from the lake, deep and commanding. Come in, Alyssa. You don't need to stand in the hallway. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study was masculine and intimidating, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, leather furniture, a fireplace with an ornate mantel. And standing by the window, backlit by morning sun, was the man who had saved her life. Marcus Vale was not what Alyssa expected, though she hadn't known what to expect. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, tall and powerfully built beneath an expensive dark suit, with black hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and controlled intensity. His eyes, she saw as he turned to face her fully, were a striking gray, the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on her with an attention that made her want to step backward. But she held her ground, lifting her chin despite the fear making her pulse race. "Thank you," she said, her damaged voice making the words sound smaller than she intended. "For saving my life." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to the desk and picked up a glass of water, crossing the room to hand it to her. "Your throat will be sore for a few days. Drink slowly." She took the glass automatically, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and she was startled by the warmth of his skin. She sipped the water gratefully while he returned to his position by the window, maintaining distance as if aware of how intimidating his presence was in the confined space. "You went out too far," Marcus said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You cramped and panicked. By the time I reached you, you had stopped fighting. Another 30 seconds and you would have drowned." Alyssa swallowed carefully. You were at the party? I didn't see you. I wasn't at the party. I was passing on the access road and saw someone struggling in the water. I made a decision. He said it simply, as if diving into a lake to save a stranger was unremarkable. Why did you bring me here? Alyssa asked, the question she had been building toward. Why not a hospital? Marcus's expression shifted slightly, something guarded entering his eyes. Because hospitals ask questions and file reports? Because I value privacy. Because I could provide better immediate care here than you would receive waiting in an emergency room. He paused, then added with complete honesty. And because once I pulled you from that water, once I felt your heart stop, and then start again beneath my hands, I felt responsible for you. I needed to know you would be all right. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Alyssa didn't know how to respond. She studied him, this stranger who had saved her, trying to reconcile the obvious wealth and power he commanded with the care he had shown. Who are you? She asked quietly. Really? Marcus's smile was slight and cold. I'm someone you should probably be afraid of, Alyssa. I own businesses, some legitimate, many not. I make decisions that affect lives, and I don't lose sleep over the consequences. People fear my name, or they should. But despite all that, I couldn't watch you die. He moved closer, and Alyssa fought the urge to retreat. So now we have a situation. You're here, in my home, wearing clothes I provided, alive because I chose to act. And I find myself uncertain what to do with you. The bluntness of the statement should have terrified her, but something in his tone suggested he was as confused by the situation as she was. Alyssa set the water glass down on a nearby table, her hands surprisingly steady. I should go home. Thank you for everything. For saving me, for the doctor, for all of this. But I need to get back to my life. What life? The question was sharp, almost cruel. Marcus tilted his head, studying her. The cramped apartment you share with a roommate who's never there? The job that bores you? The friends who didn't notice you were missing? I had you investigated last night, Alyssa. I know exactly what you're going back to. Anger flared through her fear, hot and defensive. You had no right. Marcus's expression didn't change. I had every right. You're in my house. I needed to know who you were, if you were a threat, if anyone would come looking for you. And what I found was a young woman with no family nearby, no real connections, working a job that doesn't value her, living a life that's slowly suffocating her. Am I wrong? Alyssa wanted to argue, to defend her existence, but the words stuck in her throat because he wasn't wrong. He had summarized her entire life in 2 sentences, and the accuracy of it was devastating. She felt tears burning behind her eyes and refused to let them fall, refused to show this powerful stranger how completely he had stripped away her defenses. Marcus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm not trying to hurt you, Alyssa. I'm trying to make you see an opportunity. You could go back to that life, return to the accounting firm on Monday, and pretend this never happened. Or you could stay. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting. Stay? Alyssa repeated, uncertain she had heard correctly. Here? Marcus nodded slowly. I find myself interested in you, in the woman who swam too far from shore, who gave up, and then fought to live when I breathed air back into her lungs. I want to know who you are beneath the careful mediocrity you've wrapped yourself in. And what would staying mean exactly? Alyssa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She needed to understand what he was proposing, what price would come with this impossible offer. It would mean living here, Marcus said, moving to sit on the edge of his desk, his posture more relaxed now. You would have your own rooms, your own space. You would be under my protection, which is considerable. you would want for nothing material. In return, I would ask for your company, your conversation, your presence at certain events where I require someone intelligent and observant at my side. Nothing more, unless you chose to offer it. Alyssa's mind reeled. He was offering her a life of luxury in exchange for what? Companionship? It sounded too simple, too good to be true. There has to be more, she said, searching his face for deception. People like you don't make offers like this without expecting something. Marcus's smile was genuine this time, touched with what might have been respect. You're right to be suspicious. Yes, there would be more. You would see things, Alyssa. My business, my world, it's not clean or simple. You would be exposed to situations that might frighten you, to people who are dangerous, to choices that exist in moral gray areas. You would need to learn to keep secrets, to trust me even when you don't understand what's happening. And in return for that burden, I would give you a life you never imagined, experiences you've only read about, and the protection of someone who never fails to protect what's his. The possessive pronoun sent a shiver through her. Fear and something darker. Something she didn't want to examine. This is insane, Alyssa said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. I don't know you. You don't know me. This doesn't happen in real life. Marcus stood, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I pulled you from death yesterday, Alyssa. I felt your body go limp in my arms. I forced water from your lungs and air back into them. I watched you take your first breath after dying. That creates a bond, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of damp hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. I don't make offers like this. I don't save drowning strangers. I don't bring women into my home and ask them to stay. But you're different. You were meant to find me, or I was meant to find you. Call it fate or coincidence or divine intervention. I don't care what you call it. I only know that I'm not ready to let you walk away. Alyssa's breath caught. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that she should refuse and run and never look back. But a deeper part, the part that had been slowly dying in her ordinary life, the part that had whispered dangerous thoughts in the dark hours of sleepless nights, that part was screaming something different. It was screaming yes. I need time, she said, the compromise emerging from somewhere between terror and temptation. I need to think about this. I can't just decide my entire future standing in your study. Marcus nodded, stepping back and giving her space. Of course. Stay through the weekend. Let me show you what this life could be. Monday, you can make your decision. If you choose to leave, I'll have you driven home with a generous payment for your trouble, and we'll part as strangers. But if you choose to stay, he paused, his gray eyes intense, then we begin something neither of us can predict. Alyssa knew she should refuse even this much, should demand to be taken home immediately, but she heard herself say, all right, through the weekend. Marcus's smile was slow and satisfied, and Alyssa realized with a flutter of fear and anticipation that she had just taken the first step into a world from which there might be no return. The drowning girl who had given up in dark water had been pulled into something far more dangerous than any lake, and she was terrified to discover that part of her welcomed it. The weekend passed in a strange, dreamlike blur. Marcus was true to his word, showing Alyssa a life she had never imagined. Saturday afternoon, he took her through the estate, explaining its history, the centuries-old gardens that required a team of specialists to maintain, the private stable with horses that cost more than she would earn in 5 years. He was a surprisingly patient guide, answering her questions without condescension, watching her reactions with that intense focus that made her feel both visible and vulnerable. That evening, he insisted she join him for dinner, a formal affair in a dining room that could seat 20, but felt oddly intimate with just the two of them at one end of the long table. The food was extraordinary, prepared by a chef whose name Marcus mentioned casually, not realizing or perhaps not caring that Alyssa recognized it from a cooking show. They talked, carefully at first, dancing around personal topics, but gradually finding rhythm in discussions about books, about the city, about philosophy and art. Marcus was educated in a way that suggested private tutors and prestigious universities, but he wore his knowledge lightly, genuinely interested in her opinions, even when they contradicted his own. Sunday brought a different test. Marcus had business to attend to, and he invited Alyssa to observe. She found herself in a converted wing of the house that served as his operational headquarters, watching him conduct meetings with men who spoke in careful code about shipments and territories, and problems that needed solving. She saw the transformation in him, the casual ease of dinner replaced by cold authority, the man who had saved her life, revealing himself as someone truly dangerous. One meeting in particular chilled her. A man, nervous and sweating, was brought before Marcus to explain a missing payment. Marcus listened without expression, then delivered judgment with terrifying calm. "You have 48 hours to return what you took, or I will take something of equal value from you. The choice of what I take will be mine." The man left pale and shaking, and Marcus turned to Alyssa with a slight smile. "You're frightened." "Good. You should be. This is what I am, Alyssa. Not the man who takes you riding or discusses literature over wine." But instead of running, Alyssa found herself asking questions. Why does he owe you? What happens if he doesn't pay? Are you going to hurt him? Marcus answered each question honestly, explaining the structure of his organization, the necessity of maintaining reputation through decisive action, the reality that mercy was often more dangerous than cruelty in his world. He didn't soften the truth or try to justify his choices with noble intentions. He simply showed her the machinery of power and let her decide if she could exist within it. That night, unable to sleep in the luxurious guest suite she had been moved to, Alyssa wandered the house and found Marcus in his study, working through papers by lamplight. He looked up at her appearance, no surprise, in his expression, as if he had been expecting her. "I can't stop thinking about it," Alyssa admitted, standing in the doorway. "About what you do, who you are. I should be horrified. I should want to leave." "Why don't I?" Marcus set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Because you're more than the life you've been living, Alyssa. You've spent years making yourself small, acceptable, safe. But there's something in you that wants more, that's hungry for intensity and meaning even if it comes wrapped in danger." He stood and crossed to her, close but not touching. "I recognized it because I see it in myself. We're both capable of existing in the dark, Alyssa. The difference is I've accepted it, and you're still pretending you belong in the light." His words struck something deep and true, a recognition she didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't deny. She had always felt this way, had always known there was something in her that didn't fit the safe, ordinary path she had chosen. Standing in his study, in his world, she felt more alive than she had in years. That realization terrified her. Monday morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it the weight of decision. Alyssa stood in the bedroom where she had first woken, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow, or perhaps she was finally seeing herself clearly. Catherine knocked softly and entered with a garment bag. "For if you're staying," she said simply, hanging it in the closet. "Mr. Vale is waiting in the breakfast room." Alyssa made her way downstairs with a sense of walking toward an irrevocable moment. She found Marcus at a small table by tall windows overlooking the gardens, morning light making his dark hair gleam. He rose when she entered, ever the gentleman, and pulled out her chair. They ate in silence for several minutes, both aware of the conversation looming but unwilling to rush toward it. Finally, Marcus set down his coffee cup and met her eyes. "What have you decided?" Alyssa took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I have questions first. What exactly would my role be here? Would I be a prisoner? A possession?" Marcus shook his head. "Neither. You would be free to come and go, though with security for your safety. You would be my companion publicly, my confidant privately. I would expect your loyalty and discretion. Beyond that, you define your own boundaries. And if I wanted to leave later, if this doesn't work, then you leave," Marcus said simply. "I won't hold you against your will, Alyssa, but I will ask that if you stay, you commit to trying, to giving this a real chance. Not forever, but for now." Alyssa studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation and finding only honest intensity. She thought about her apartment, her job, her carefully constructed ordinary life. She thought about drowning in dark water, about strong arms pulling her back to life, about waking in silk sheets and discovering a world she never knew existed. She thought about the hunger Marcus had named, the part of her that had always wanted more even when she was afraid to reach for it. "I'll stay," she said, the words feeling like jumping off a cliff. "For now, I'll stay." Something flared in Marcus's eyes, triumph mixed with something deeper, something possessive and protective at once. He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "You won't regret this, Alyssa." But she already knew that was a lie. She would regret it and treasure it, fear it, and crave it. She had chosen to stay with a man who commanded darkness, who had pulled her from death and offered her a life of dangerous luxury. The drowning girl who had given up in the water had been reborn in the arms of a man who dealt in power and violence, and there was no going back to the safety of mediocrity. The first weeks of Alyssa's new life unfolded like learning a foreign language, everything familiar, yet strange. She occupied a suite of rooms in the East Wing, her own private domain decorated to her taste, after Marcus had insisted she choose everything herself. She had use of the house and grounds, access to vehicles and drivers, a clothing allowance that made her dizzy, and complete freedom of movement. Yet she felt constantly aware of invisible boundaries, of the security personnel who shadowed her movements, of the weight of being associated with Marcus Vale. He made time for her daily, sometimes brief conversations over breakfast, sometimes long evening discussions that stretched past midnight. They talked about everything and nothing, building a strange intimacy based on honesty rather than conventional romance. Marcus never touched her beyond casual gestures, never pressured her for anything beyond her company. But the attraction between them was palpable, a constant current running beneath every interaction. Alyssa felt it in the way his eyes followed her across a room, in the careful distance he maintained, in the tension that built whenever they were alone together. She attended her first public event with Marcus on a Friday evening 3 weeks after choosing to stay. It was a charity gala at the city's most prestigious hotel, an event where the wealthy gathered to display their generosity and make connections that had nothing to do with charity. Marcus had arranged for a stylist to help Alyssa prepare, and she barely recognized herself in the mirror, wearing a deep blue gown that fit like it was made for her, because it had been. Her hair swept up in an elegant style, subtle makeup highlighting features she had always considered plain. When Marcus saw her descending the stairs, something shifted in his expression, the careful control slipping to reveal raw appreciation. "You're beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Stay close to me tonight. There will be people who will try to use you to get to me, or to gather information. Trust no one. The gala was overwhelming, a sea of designer gowns and expensive suits, champagne flowing freely, conversations layered with subtext and hidden agenda. Marcus introduced her simply as Alyssa, offering no explanation of her role or relationship to him, letting people draw their own conclusions. She saw the speculation in their eyes, the calculation, the judgment. She met businessmen and politicians, socialites and criminals dressed in respectability, all of them orbiting Marcus with varying degrees of deference and fear. And she watched Marcus work the room with practiced ease, his hand a constant warm presence at her back, guiding and protecting. Halfway through the evening, a man approached them, older, distinguished, with cold eyes that assessed Alyssa like merchandise. Marcus, the man said smoothly, ignoring Alyssa entirely. I wasn't aware you were bringing a date. You've been keeping secrets. Alyssa Morgan, Marcus said, his tone casual but carrying an edge of warning. Alyssa, this is David Brennan. He considers himself a business rival. Brennan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Charming. Tell me, Miss Morgan, how did you come to be associated with our friend Marcus? Before Alyssa could answer, Marcus's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her back. Alyssa is under my protection, Brennan. That's all you need to know. I'd advise you to remember that. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Brennan's smile hardened, but he stepped back with a slight nod. Of course. Enjoy your evening. As he walked away, Alyssa felt the tension in Marcus's posture. That was a test, Marcus said quietly. He wanted to see if you could be intimidated or manipulated. You did well by saying nothing. Did I pass? Alyssa asked, trying for lightness despite her racing heart. Marcus looked down at her, and his smile was genuine, touched with pride. You're learning. The evening ended without further incident, but as they drove home, Alyssa felt the weight of what she had stepped into settling more firmly on her shoulders. This was her life now, these careful social battles, these power games played in evening gowns and expensive venues. That night, Marcus walked her to her suite, lingering in the doorway. You were perfect tonight, he said quietly. Everyone who matters now knows you're mine. The possessive statement should have angered her, should have triggered her independence and made her push back. Instead, it sent warmth through her chest, a dangerous pleasure at being claimed by someone like Marcus Vale. I'm not yours, she said, but the protest was weak, automatic. Marcus stepped closer, and for the first time he reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. Aren't you? You're here in my house, wearing clothes I provided, protected by my name, choosing every day to stay. If that's not being mine, Alyssa, what would you call it? She didn't have an answer, couldn't form words past the hammering of her heart and the intensity of his gaze. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tension, balanced on the edge of something neither was quite ready to name. Then Marcus stepped back, letting his hand fall. Sleep well, Alyssa. Tomorrow I'll show you another piece of my world. He walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway, trembling with something that had nothing to do with fear. The drowning girl had been saved, pulled from death into a life of luxury and danger, and somewhere along the way, she had stopped being a victim of circumstance and become a willing participant in her own transformation. She was falling for him, for the dangerous man who had breathed life back into her lungs and was now slowly, methodically claiming her heart. And the most terrifying part was that she wanted to let him.